So welcome. Thank you for joining us for the last session of the first day of Connecticut's Affordable Housing Conference. My name is Chelsea Ross. I'm the Deputy Director of the Partnership for Strong Communities, and I'm joined here today by Sean Gio, Senior Policy Advisor at the Partnership, and we'll be supporting this session. Join the conversation at hashtag CAHC 2022 on Twitter and follow us at PSC Housing if you haven't already. You are at the last session entitled Implementing Fair Share Key Decision Points. Super exciting and interesting way to end the first day of the conference. And before I hand it over to your presenters, we'd like to just quickly thank our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Department of Housing, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, La Rosa Building Group, the Melville Charitable Trust, and Wells Fargo. Their deep support has allowed the conference to happen again this year. Thank you to our collaborating sponsors. And we have an armful of supporting sponsors that have helped make this conference happen. So thank you to all of those generous sponsors. And last but not least, a great big thank you to the sponsor for this session, CHR. I also want to share that the Partnership for Strong Communities housing data profiles are updated. You can access latest housing data for all of Connecticut's towns and cities in an online interactive format. You can get the fast facts on affordable housing or do a deep dive into the distribution of your city's housing costs. So I'll pop a link to those in the chat there. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded. We'll make all recordings available as soon as possible. All participants are entered muted. Please remain on mute until a speaker has asked you to unmute. If you have a technology issue, please select the chat icon in the Zoom control panel and send it to myself or Sean, and we will do our best to assist you. Your speakers today will let you know how they would like content questions to be submitted. And post-session, you can complete a session feedback survey by clicking on the megaphone icon in the lobby, and we really appreciate your feedback. And with that, I will turn it over to Erin Boggs to get us started. Erin.
Thank you, and thanks to the Partnership for hosting this conference, which is always wonderful and informative. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm just going to jump right in by sharing my screen and framing things up a little bit. As many of you know, for the last 2 years, there's been a proposal at the legislature on fair share planning and zoning. The most recent year proposal was a very high level proposal, meaning that a lot of the blanks needed to be filled in by the legislature or by policymakers after the fact. And so we are here today with the folks from New Jersey who've been doing this for many years and have come across all of the implementation questions, and they're going to help us figure out what works and what doesn't as we move forward with thinking this through in Connecticut. I wanted to just pause also and say I'm here really wearing two hats. One is the hat of Growing Together Connecticut, which is a consortium effort of groups working to reinvest in cities and make sure that we have affordable housing opportunities everywhere. I'm also here wearing the Open Communities Alliance hat, which is an organization that works to address the impact of segregation through partnerships, advocacy, education, policy analysis, and litigation. And there's some members of Growing Together. So today we are joined by Adam Gordon, who's the Executive Director of the Fair Share Housing Center in New Jersey, which I think of as sort of the champion of the fair share system in New Jersey, which is called Mount Laurel. Professor David Kinsey of Kinsey Hand Planning, who is also a lecturer at Princeton University, and Open Communities Alliance has been lucky enough to work with Professor Kinsey on developing a fair share model for Connecticut. Joseph Del Duca, who is a partner and director of affordable housing at Walters Group, Walters Apartments, and Pastor Terrence Porter, who is the president and executive director of the Red Bank Affordable Housing Corporation and a senior minister at Pilgrim Baptist Church in Red Bank, New Jersey. And to the right on this slide are is one development, Cedar Crossing, that Pastor Porter has worked on, and below that is a development that Joseph Del Duca and Walters Group has worked on. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. So just very quickly to set the stage, I want to move as soon as I can to our guests. Fair share as proposed in Connecticut is really simple at a high level. The goal is to determine the need for affordable housing, allocate it in a fair way to towns considering their track record and capacity, empower towns to adjust their planning and zoning to create a realistic opportunity to reach their goal over 10 years, provide training and technical assistance to towns as they do so, and then create a set of incentives and meaningful enforcement to ensure that the system works. So big picture,
Erin?
that's, yes.
Just a quick interrupt you. You're in presenter mode, so folks are
Oh,
seeing
thank
a
you so
small
much.
slide and then
so much.
upcoming slides. So if you switch
There
to
we
use
go.
slideshow.
There we go. How's that?
Still in the same format. If you click that use slideshow button, that should take you out of presenter mode.
Oh, I don't see it.
Next to swap displays, there's a button that says use slideshow instead.
Okay.
Let's see if that'll work.
All right, there we go. Thank you, Chelsea.
I don't see it at all now, but let's try resharing so that folks can see it. I know you have great graphs and whatnot to share, and I want to make sure folks can see it.
Yeah, so let's try it again. All right.
And then play from the slide that you wanted to start from. Perfect.
Right.
That looks good,
All
Erin.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're very kind to let me know. So the way we have worked to identify the need for affordable housing, and we'll have time to talk about this in more depth with Professor Kinsey, is we've taken a conservative approach. We've looked at the number of households in Connecticut who earn less than 30% of area median income. That's about $30,000 a year for a family of 4, and are paying more than half of their income towards housing costs. And that's about 137,000 families. And once a town has this number, there may be a way to, in New Jersey, there's some adjustments that happen for zoning for more needed housing. But within that, once there's a number for a town, a target number, a goal, the town can use all kinds of approaches to get to the housing, the planning and zoning for the numbers that they have. So they can use inclusionary zoning, missing middle, larger multifamily housing, increase the density with smaller lots, subsidized housing, affordable housing trust funds, transit-oriented development in places that can accommodate that, and accessory dwelling units. So the towns really get to make the call and have the control to get to their fair share, to plan and zone for their fair share. But this sets up a structure within which they can work. And so there are allocations that are out by region, so we can take into account regional differences. And then allocations out to towns, considering the town's median income, wealth in the form of the grand list, the multifamily housing percentage, and the poverty percentage, with towns with a higher level of poverty taken out of the assessment. So we borrow heavily from the New Jersey system in this. As I said, it's a high-level proposal, so I think there's a lot that we can learn from New Jersey. And with that, I will hand it off to Adam Gordon to help us learn a little bit more about the New Jersey system.
Thanks, Erin, and great to see you all and be virtually in Connecticut. I went to Yale for college and law school, so I lived in New Haven for 7 years, and it's one of my favorite places I've ever lived. And it's been really interesting to learn about what Erin and others are working on to try to address some of the same issues we've been focused on in New Jersey and Connecticut. I'm going to share a PowerPoint that's just a quick overview of 50 years of history in 10 minutes of how we got to the system that we have and what it does. Hold on a second. Excuse me. There we go. All right. So as Erin said, our organization, Fair Share Housing Center, is the main outside of government organization that works to enforce the Mount Laurel Doctrine. We were founded by the people who brought the Mount Laurel case, which I will talk about right now. Where does Mount Laurel come from? It comes from a Black community in Mount Laurel Township. Mount Laurel Township was, people often don't think it's about New Jersey, but we're just above the Mason-Dixon line. We were a critical state on the Underground Railroad, especially in southern and central New Jersey. And there are many rural Black communities that were built around people who escaped from the South and came up here on the Underground Railroad. One of them centered around this church, Jacob's Chapel AME Church, the oldest AME church in the state of New Jersey, in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And Mount Laurel is about 25 minutes from Philadelphia and 20 minutes from Camden, and was historically a rural farming town. The New Jersey Turnpike was built right through it. And when that happened, combined with white flight that happened in the 50s and 60s, from Camden especially, there was increasing suburban development, and that development did not accommodate the Black community that had been there for almost 200 years at that point. And there was an amazing community organizing effort centered around the Southern Burlington County NAACP branch, which was centered in Mount Laurel. Oh, that went away. And basically, and they got funding to build 36 garden apartments. And the town said, hey, garden apartments aren't allowed by our zoning. And literally the mayor came to Jacob's Chapel, the church that was really the center of a lot of the Black community in Mount Laurel, and said, if you people can't afford to live in our town, then you'll just have to leave. Interesting choice of words, given that that community had been there for 200 years, right? And so that led to a lawsuit. And very interestingly, it was a lawsuit that was very consciously, people often know it as, Southern Burlington NAACP versus Mount Laurel Township, but also critically plaintiffs were the Camden NAACP and also leaders of a Puerto Rican group in Camden as well, who were concerned about the way in which Mount Laurel basically taking all the white residents out of Camden, taking all the businesses from Camden, was impacting the city of Camden, especially with Mount Laurel not building any affordable housing. So there's always been this urban suburban link in the work from the very start, which we can talk more about. So very briefly, again, a lot of history. We had these two court cases, Mount Laurel 1 and Mount Laurel 2, 1975 and 1983, that says that every town affirmatively has to provide for its fair share of the regional need for affordable housing. That was then codified. This was all done judicially, and the Supreme Court said, we invite the legislature to help come up with a solution. Well, the legislature came up with an administrative process in the New Jersey Fair Housing Act of 1985 that put in place an agency through the council called the Council on Affordable Housing that basically reviewed towns' master plans and zoning to see whether or not they created a realistic opportunity for affordable housing. We'll talk a little bit more about what that is, and I'm sure others from New Jersey will also talk about that. This produced a significant amount of housing, but also had significant shortfalls. Most notably, there was something called regional contribution agreements, where wealthy, predominantly white suburban towns could buy out of up to half their obligation and send very small amounts of money to urban areas. And that was eventually, through an interesting coalition of urban and suburban leaders, that practice was ended in 2008. Then COA basically stops functioning for 15 years through a successive set of administrations, culminating with Chris Christie, who basically tried to stop this from happening. And in 2015, the New Jersey Supreme Court basically says this agency isn't working anymore, and says all of the pending cases before will be held before local trial courts and instead of before this agency. And so what does that process mean 7 years later? Well, all of these towns in green, which you can see cover the significant majority of the geographic area of the state, now have court-approved fair share plans. Towns in white, which are predominantly either urban towns, which don't have a Mount Laurel obligation responsive to exclusionary zoning, but do have certain other obligations we can talk about, or are very rural towns. They're small towns that generally have very little developable land. They're not participating in the process. And then only the very few blue towns here are towns that have pending fair share plans that haven't already been reviewed by the court. And so what you see is that, most of New Jersey, and this really covers most, the vast majority of suburban New Jersey that has any growth, have changed their master plan and zoning to accommodate significant amounts of affordable housing. What does that look like? This is actually a chart that David made from data by the state agency. From 1980 to 2014, basically as a result of COA, there were about 65,000 homes that were created. Predominantly, they're 100% affordable, or affordable units that are part of inclusionary developments. And importantly, those inclusionary developments often contain middle-class housing that's market rate housing that is still more affordable than most of the housing in many of these towns. Also, supportive and special needs housing for people with disabilities and people experiencing homelessness are a key part of the system. And then there's some miscellaneous categories as well. And we project that as a result of those 330 plus municipal agreements, now 340 plus, didn't update the slide, we're going to have an additional 50,000 plus affordable homes coming online to supplement this. Again, those are going to be predominantly either 100% affordable municipally sponsored developments, which Pastor Porter will talk a little bit later about, and then also Joe will talk. Joe does some of both of the 100% affordable and inclusionary developments, and you'll hear more from them about their experience doing that. And so what's the impact of this on New Jersey? Well, the interesting thing about this, if you combine this data from 1980 to 2000, is that we actually saw when Mount Laurel was most heavily enforced in the past, that we had, if you combine these two bars together, home prices and rents basically rose with incomes and not faster than incomes from 1980 to 2000. And then from 2000 to 2015, this period when known as the gap period, when Mount Laurel was not enforced, we saw home prices rise at 3 times the rate of income and rents at 2 times the rate of income. And so, not surprisingly, it's sort of a natural experiment. When towns don't have to actually comply with their obligations, guess what? They don't tend to comply with their obligations, and housing becomes much less affordable. And that's the hole that we're digging out of today. And hopefully those 50,000 homes will be a start to addressing. One of the things, this is a really interesting recent graph by the New York City Planning Department. They actually have this fascinating Department of Regional Planning, which we've recently become familiar with, that looks at the whole region. And this is sort of the story more recently. So as a result of that 2015 court process and the settlements and fair share plans I mentioned, New Jersey has started producing far more multifamily housing. From 2015 to 2019, the number of multifamily housing units permitted in New Jersey doubled, and it's stayed at that level every year since. And what that shows, this is a regional comparison from 2020. And what that shows is that the northern New Jersey suburbs actually outproduced all of New York City, even though New York City has significant, New York City and the entire New Jersey state population are pretty similar. This is just the part of New Jersey that's in the New York metro area, not the part where I live in the Philly area. And just that part of New Jersey significantly outproduced New York City. And then if you look at where you all are, or at least where some of you all are, I mean, this is just the Litchfield, New Haven, and Fairfield counties. I mean, if you look at both the Connecticut suburbs and the New York suburbs, it's incredible how much less housing they're producing. And and just to give some context to this, if you add up inner New Jersey and outer New Jersey, that area has about the same population as if you add up the Connecticut and New York suburbs. And you add those up, and basically in 2020, the New Jersey suburbs produce housing at 3 times the amount of the New York and Connecticut suburbs, even though they have basically the same population. So that shows the huge disparity that's driven not entirely by Mount Laurel, but probably that's the biggest single factor. And you see that on the right too. Long Island is the most extreme example. Northern New Jersey in 2020 produced new housing at approximately 6.5 times the per capita rate of Long Island. That's a pretty incredible statistic for being part of the same metropolitan area. So what does this look like in practice? This is from Mount Laurel Township's own fair share plan, and towns have numbers that they have to fulfill, and then they have to do things that create a realistic opportunity, and that's the types of mechanisms that were in the chart and showed before. 100% affordables. You see inclusionary development here. You see extensions of affordability controls, which is preservation of existing housing, special needs housing, assisted living, that add up to that fair share number. And we don't have a lot of time to get into a lot of the details on this, but that's the basic framework of what towns have to do to comply. And then they have to actually do the things that they need to do to support that. They have to change the zoning for 100% affordable developments. They have to actually support the development with things like a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, contributions from our local housing trust funds, which pretty much every town in New Jersey has, and other things. Here are some quick examples. We're going to hear a lot from other speakers about other examples, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. You know, this is a development in Princeton, and that development is a redevelopment of a former hospital site by Avalon Bay. You can see the market rate rents range from, and this is a little bit outdated. It's probably going on even since then, but you know, from $2,000 to a little over $4,500 in the affordable rents. And it's important we really focus on getting down to very low income up to moderate income, which those terms are different in New Jersey. I guess you call them extremely low income to low income, is 30 to 80% of median. You know, that's the range of affordable rents. This is a huge redevelopment project right near the CAHC train station, right outside New York City, the biggest intersection of transit points in New Jersey. This has over 2,000 total apartments. We had to sue the developer in the town to make sure that there were significant affordables in here, but you can see the comparison there. Last two points. You know, there was this study that David was part of, along with Doug Massey and others at Princeton, of the development that called Ethel Lawrence Homes for the head organizer who really pulled this all together at the start. And you know, it's interesting because they started off fighting for 36 homes, and today this development and associated developments have about 200 homes. So we didn't just get what we originally fought for. We've pushed for more and more in accordance with the growth of New Jersey over time, and found huge impacts in terms of both adults and children for people who moved there. This was an amazing study that looked at compared people who got in the lottery and people who didn't get in, and found no impact at all on taxes, property values, and crime rates of the community. And the last thing I'll leave you with is something that we're very concerned about today. We passed the first bill in the country in 2021 called the Fair Chance in Housing Act that limits the use of criminal background screenings in all housing, basically, not just affordable housing. And we really are concerned on making sure there's a fair process to access the affordable housing, because as we're seeing more and more need for affordable housing, which is partly produced by that housing shortage, you know, we're seeing more and more use of screening criteria that can especially disparately impact Black and Latino families and really limit the ability of who gets in the affordable housing. And that is an area that we are focused more and more on now. And this is something that, you know, we passed this bill, which was not easy, which is the first in the country. And we're really looking at making sure there's fair marketing. We passed the bill on that too, you know, and fair screening practices. And, you know, you need to build the housing, but you also have to make sure that it's actually fairly accessible to everybody who's eligible, especially people who would normally be screened out. So I will stop right there. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. And I think probably people who have just been hearing about fair share but haven't been focusing on it in Connecticut might start to understand a little bit more about why we are such big fans of fair share. It really produces the housing that's needed. I have a question next for David to think about the data a little bit. David, for the Connecticut Fair Share Assessment, you assessed the need for housing in Connecticut conservatively at about 137,000 units, based on the number of families earning 30% of area median income who are paying more than half of their income towards housing costs. Now, we define this as a proxy number. It's not that this is actually the number of units that each town, at that affordability level that each town would be zoning for. Why is it okay to sort of convert that into a proxy for number of units rather than creating the number of units at that affordability level?
Thanks, Erin. About 28% of Connecticut's 1.4 million households are lower income households who pay more than 30% of their income for housing. So by definition, these 375,000 households need affordable housing. But while the state's affordable housing needs are severe, they have accumulated over decades. Consequently, the Open Communities Alliance Fair Share assessment pegs the statewide need at about 135,000 affordable housing units, based on the number of extremely low-income Connecticut households who pay more than 50% of their income for housing, as calculated by HUD, as you indicated. This is a proxy for Connecticut's diverse housing needs. It recognizes both the capacity of the state's home building industry and the financial subsidies that are available for affordable housing. The idea is that a well-defined portion of regional housing need would be allocated fairly to each town, which would then plan, zone, and create opportunities for housing affordable to a broad range of lower income households, from 0 all the way up through 80% of area median income.
Thank you. And just to clarify one thing, and I think this is really a quick question for Adam. In New Jersey, are towns expected to themselves build the housing, or is this about planning and zoning?
Towns very, very, very rarely actually build the housing themselves. I can name a few examples, but they're very rare. It's much more about zoning, and also if they're going to create 100% affordable housing, which both Pastor Porter and Joe can talk more about, they have to do certain things to help support the 100% affordable developments. But the towns almost never, I mean, towns are allowed to do that if they wish, but it's very, very rare, and it's really not something that they're required to do.
Fantastic. So speaking of Pastor Porter, so your church and housing development work is in the town of Red Bank. Can you briefly describe the town and describe the role that Mount Laurel has played in your organization's housing development, and really help us think about, has this housing hurt the town? Has it increased crime? Has it brought down property values?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Greetings, everyone. Yeah, again, I represent the Red Bank Affordable Housing Corporation, and we were established to assist the borough, if you will, with understanding their commitment to affordable housing. So we have really been engaged with being an advocate for not just homeowners and the borough of Red Bank and community leaders that really want to understand affordable housing and the impact on the community. We sort of filled a gap that did not exist as far as leadership and direction. But when we got involved with affordable housing in Red Bank, Red Bank is has a population of about 13,000 people. Demographically, it's 73% white, another 19% Hispanic, and about 9% African American. So the community is somewhat diverse in terms of the population. The median income in Red Bank is about $115,000 per year. So, you know, we tried to understand the community we lived in, as well as the needs for housing or affordable housing, but also the general growth of the community itself. Red Bank is growing at a rate of about 0.6% per year, but it's considered to be one of the best places to live in the state of New Jersey. So, but we believe it's gotten that title over what's been done the last 6 years. In the last 6 years, the affordable housing in the community has made a positive impact on the community, I believe. We have a 100% home ownership initiative in the community. We built 36 affordable housing townhouses that were made available to low and moderate income families. And what I celebrate about affordable housing in Red Bank is that those families are now not only contributors to the tax process in Red Bank, but they're also very supportive of what we do in Red Bank as far as the community wellness initiatives. The biggest thing that we had to deal with as a developer because Red Bank did not want to build affordable housing. They didn't have the resources to do it. So we had to look for creative partnerships with state organizations to come in and sort of to help, and of course, banking institutions that would provide gap loans and things of that nature. When Red Bank was reluctant to move forward with affordable housing plan, that's when Fair Share Housing came along and partnered with us and really assisted to help us understand the legal commitments that the cities borough had to comply with, as well as how to navigate through some of the tax issues and tax codes and zoning codes in the city. So without Fair Share Housing, our project would have never moved as rapidly as it did. But as a result of what we built in Red Bank and what we continue to do with rehab programs and trust funds and first-time owner programs, we've been able to build a model that is being replicated throughout the state, because it's a model that includes a partnership of the borough, the Red Bank Affordable Housing Corporation, and the existing Red Bank Housing Authority. And so each of them plays a significant role in ensuring that affordable housing the commitment of affordable housing is basically complied with according to the Fair Share Plan. So it's been positive in Red Bank. But we had to break down the barriers of perception because communities had the perception that affordable housing would be a stain on their community and therefore would bring an element into their community that would impact the community in a negative way. In Red Bank and the other communities we work with, that has not been the case. Affordable property values, home values have not gone down. They've actually increased in Red Bank, and I like to say that's because of the Cedar Crossing project and Red Bank Affordable Housing Corporation. But our units are really surrounded by market rate units that are going for $500,000 to $600,000 per unit. And people would not move into those units if they felt that the affordable housing that was right next to it was a negative plight on that community. So affordable housing can be done when the perceptions are broken down, the barriers are broken down, the perceptions that it would be a negative impact on the community. But when you work together in partnership, the borough, the communities, the municipalities, with local agencies that want to promote affordable housing, I think all programs can be very, very successful. So I just applaud affordable housing. I applaud what's being done in the state of Connecticut as you pursue even more intentional affordable housing opportunities.
Thank you. That's tremendous to hear. And, another sort of participant in all of this, a really important partner, are the developers. And so, Joe, from your perspective, how has Mount Laurel, what has it meant from a business perspective, to have Mount Laurel? And then what has the reception been to proposals that you have on the part of towns?
Well, thank you, and good late afternoon to everybody. Yes, we are a developer, a for-profit developer of affordable housing. We do other things, but almost exclusively affordable housing. So when you ask the question of what Mount Laurel has meant to us, our business is modeled around the Mount Laurel requirement. And if there were no Mount Laurel requirement, we probably would be in a different sector, and were in a different sector in the real estate world. We built our first community in around 2008. We finished it. We have about 2,000 units in the state of New Jersey now, and we're all over the state. From the top of the state to the bottom and the east to the west. We've experienced pretty much everything you can experience in the state. Predominantly, we build in suburban areas, not urban. We will build in urban areas, but the requirement that Adam explained, that each municipality provide their fair share of housing, sort of languished for many years. And then in 2015, when the courts came back and said the administrative agency was simply not meeting its responsibilities, and you had that large gap period that Adam referred to, things started to change. And I think my experience is they changed for a couple of reasons, right? This all started in 1975. And as you can tell, I'm not a young man anymore, but I was a senior in high school in 1975. And I remember the case well. And Adam's partner at Fair Share Housing is Peter O'Connor, who's sort of the godfather of affordable housing. And I know Peter well, and we develop with Peter. We do development work with him. And some of the Mount Laurel properties that were developed under the original docket number, we did with him, and we're very proud of that work that we've been able to accomplish in Mount Laurel. And I can tell you that the difference in Mount Laurel is profound compared to what it was. I mean, you saw the quote from the mayor in 1970 or whenever that quote was. But the mayor in Mount Laurel now is an African American, and who was very supportive of affordable housing. We're just doing a senior affordable community with Peter O'Connor there as we speak, and we've met, with, well, I wouldn't call it completely open arms in the community, much more enthusiasm than they met with in the 70s and 80s. And what's happened is that over a long period of time, it has just become understood in New Jersey, a very dense state similar to Connecticut, but even more dense, that affordable housing is required, and there are reasons for it. And in my view, as older mayors and elected officials have sort of aged out and moved on, and we've been able to replace them with younger, more progressive people in the community, fair share obligations and fair share opportunities have become more accepted, and most people understand the need for it. The other thing that happens is when you build it, when you're in the situation you're in Connecticut and you don't have much of it, there aren't a lot of examples. And so you have the perception that Pastor Porter talked about of the problems that you're going to face. And we face that in most towns where we've developed, that you're going to have a lot of crime. You're going to have problems. The police are always going to have to be there. It's going to be difficult in our schools. We're going to have special needs kids. It's going to cost us more money. And none of those things are true. And what ends up happening is you get through the process of building a community. And in our case, most of our communities are funded with 9% low-income housing tax credits. There are other programs, but it's a good one to use as an example, because those tax credits are also available in Connecticut. They're based on population, and it's a terrific program. And so what ends up happening, one of the things I say to mayors when I go in and see them is, would you like a $12 million federal dollars coming into your community? And most mayors start off with the answer, yes, we'd like to have that happen. And that's what ends up happening is you're able to build, and you saw some of the photographs of what we build, a market rate community, but with lower rents. And the system works extremely well. It's very well implemented in New Jersey by HMFA, the housing agency, because they've got lots of experience with it. And we've refined things over the years. There's a lot of work left to do. And I would be much less than honest if we're telling you that every suburban community that I visited welcomed us with open arms. They welcome us now because they know they have an obligation. And thanks to Adam and Peter and the people who have preceded us, that obligation is real, but that obligation is much more accepted. I mean, there were times when, and Adam can tell you better than I can, there are places where I've been, we're not building affordable housing. They're not going to tell us what to do. They're not going to be a social engineering project for Trenton, New Jersey, which is the capital of New Jersey. That's not going to happen. And over my dead body, that's what's going to happen. Well, there's no more of that, because all of the municipalities who decided that they were going to challenge those regulations were thoroughly thrashed by Fair Share in court and through the system. And over time, people have accepted it. And then, I don't think we're in the part where people embrace it yet, but I can tell you that once we've built our communities and people drive by them, no one knows that they're affordable apartment communities. It just is not something that people know. And over time, I can say that there are some communities that we've built, some suburban, high income communities that I would say are affirmatively proud and pleased that they did it. They're happy with the people who live there because they're people from the community. That's what people forget, is that, you live in a community of homes that are $1 million homes. You have lots of places to eat. You have doctor's offices. You have lots of businesses. The people who work in those businesses sometimes have to drive 60 miles to get there because they can't afford to live anywhere near. And when you give people the opportunity to live near there, I mean, think about all of you probably on this Zoom event. when you're raising children and something happens with one of your children at school, you need to be near them so that you can get to them. If you have to work 50 miles away and you're a single mom or a single dad, you can't do that. It's impossible for that to happen. And so, wealthier suburban people who have been blessed, as I have in my life, don't understand those things and don't think about them. But the people who are living that life do think about it. So you're able to provide those communities, and the woman who works at the doctor's office, or the guy who works at Home Depot, or the person who waits on you somewhere, or cuts your grass or picks up your trash, is able to raise his or her family in your community and put them in the same schools that your children get to go to. It has a profound impact on those families, and it's been a tremendous boon to both those people who live there, the residents. More importantly, what I would stress is that the overall impact of it is positive for everyone in the community. If you just want to look and forget the moral obligation, which we all understand, and you just want to look at it from the perspective of money and economics, it is so clear that people who are taken from poverty or a poor place to live and placed in an affluent community because of affordable housing are far more likely to perform well in school. They're far more likely to engage in positive social behavior, as Reverend Porter just mentioned. They are much more likely to proceed farther with their education. They're much more likely to pay taxes. They're much less likely to be incarcerated or to become in a position where they need subsidy from the state to live. So if you want to look at it from just an economic perspective, it is one of the most important, in my view, investments that we can all make as human beings to improve the world we live in, both economically and socially. So it's been a tremendously positive experience for me. I was a practicing lawyer before I started doing affordable housing. I got into it 15 years ago. I like what I do every day. I'm happy to go to work. Very pleased to go visit those 2,000 units all across the state of New Jersey. And I can tell you that we have market rate communities. The biggest difference I always tell people is whenever I have a community meeting and it's a solely market rate community, all I hear are complaints when I go to a meeting. When I go to an affordable community, 90% of what I hear is how grateful and appreciative people are and how well they're doing and how much they enjoy where they are and what it's meant to them. So I love going to those meetings. I really enjoy it. And it's been a terrific experience for us. So it's something that if there's anybody listening here who's thinking about getting into that business, it's not an easy business. The margins are pretty thin, but it's a very rewarding business. And it's one I would recommend to anybody.
Thank you, Joe. And, part of the point of growing together Connecticut is to be able to come together to make sure that all communities are communities of opportunity and that there are good choices both in suburbs and in cities. So stay tuned, because we'll be having some policy proposals focused on the reinvestment and policy change to benefit cities and city residents. But actually, a related question is, how has fair share, and this is really for Adam, is how has fair share affected cities in New Jersey to the extent it has?
I mean, one thing I would say is I think sometimes people had this fear that, everyone's going to leave the cities and go to the suburbs to build all the affordable housing here. Well, our cities, if anything, are having the opposite problem, which is that, especially in North Jersey, the cities are experiencing a huge amount of gentrification and displacement. And a lot of the other work we're doing right now is actually working on getting inclusionary zoning and other preservation measures adopted in places like Jersey City and Newark, which we were able to do with local allies in Jersey City and Newark, Asbury Park, which is not far from where Pastor Porter is, at Hoboken, several other places. So, our cities are booming for better or for worse. I think overall, the one thing, and this is Professor David Trout, who's a professor at Rutgers Law in Newark, who has written some really great stuff about Mount Laurel and housing markets, did a really amazing report about the housing market in the city of Newark. And as he points out, part of what has also happened in New Jersey cities historically is that when towns don't comply with their Mount Laurel obligations, it puts huge pressure on the housing markets in the cities because we are, New Jersey, interestingly, in the 2020 census grew more rapidly compared to the projections than in any state in the country. New Jersey is booming. And that's reflected in housing demand. It's reflected in a lot of employers moving here or expanding here. I mean, and so one of the challenges that, for example, as Professor Trout puts out in this report on Newark, Newark is facing is when other towns don't do their fair share, and we have this strong economy, it puts huge upward pressure on rents and home prices in Newark that the people who live in Newark can't afford. And so, I think having this kind of housing production throughout all the towns in the state really has benefited the cities by relieving some of that pressure. And again, I mean, we work a lot of this. Some of this intersects with Mount Laurel. Some of this is outside of the framework of Mount Laurel. But we're a lot of what we're working on now is how do we address those issues of strong economic growth and potential displacement in our cities.
Well, and so sort of the part of the upshot is the displacement issues would have been astronomically greater if it weren't for fair share.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, we're not, we have a lot of housing challenges. At the same time, we're not California, and and I think it would have been much worse if we didn't have the system in place.
So we're going to turn now to questions that anyone in the audience has, and if you could pop them in the chat, that would be great. There is one from Peggy Danaman for for Joe. Do you have affordable integrated into market rate units in your developments? Are the affordable units deed restricted affordable in perpetuity? And is that economically feasible for developers pro forma?
The answer to pretty much all those questions is yes. We do have affordable units integrated into our market rate communities, which are few. I mean, I've really focused most of my attention and my work on 100% affordable. We do some mixed income, which is a special category. We're about to build one which is half affordable and half market rate in Moorestown, New Jersey, which is a very affluent, extremely affluent community who would not have welcomed us with open arms, but for the fair share litigation. I mean, we're across the street from $5 to $10 million houses. They were not as pleased as others with what we're doing there. But the units are always deed restricted. Depending on the category you're in, they're deed restricted for 30 years, sometimes 45 years for all intents and purposes with extended use. And it used to be 30 years set, and so the program started in the 80s, so that 30 years is up. And some, especially and Adam would know about this, so some of the communities in the urban areas became pretty valuable, and the deed restriction burned off. There's a push towards effectively never allowing the deed restriction to burn off. We've never had one burn off and have no intention of doing that. So it's important, to retain the affordable component. What ends up happening is, maybe 15, 18 years in, you'll get additional tax credits to upgrade the community that you're in, because again, rents, and costs are pretty close. So, and while you're building reserves and so forth, you get another influx of tax credits, and then you extend the affordability control. So generally speaking, it's very rare for affordable communities, Adam would know better than I, to come off the deed restriction. So I think I answered all the questions.
So here's another one from Renata Bertotti. Can we also make sure that the concentration of affordable housing is prevented, even if all towns do have to allow some percent of affordable housing if they are allowed to geographically concentrate the poor by zoning in specific neighborhoods, we will only continue the pattern of segregation and stigma. Each residential neighborhood in each town should have this requirement. So Renata, for the Fair Share Connecticut proposal, there is a mechanism for counteracting maybe a town's inclination to put all of the housing that's affordable in one part of town. But I'm curious about the Mount Laurel system, if there are some safeguards there.
Or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure, Adam, why don't you take it?
Or David, do you want to start?
Or David, yeah.
Sure, let me start. There is not a statutory requirement that requires distribution of various compliance mechanisms throughout a community, but it's the essence of sound planning that the municipal planner or advocates planner, everyone should have eyes wide open and make sure that the opportunities are created throughout a community.
Fantastic.
I might add to that, Erin, that
Please, yeah.
just so people understand, for tax credit, federal tax credits in New Jersey, they have a sort of a scoring system, and that scoring system is, as David noted, planning heavy. They won't allow you to, to put affordable housing next to the trash incinerator, which is where folks would put it, or next to the industrial use, or very far away from schools. There's a scoring system. So you're not going to qualify for the tax credits if you don't meet that scoring system. And the idea is to have good schools, be near schools, have transportation available, have jobs available, all of those kinds of things. So it's a practical purpose, although it's not statutory, from a practical standpoint, at least for the tax credit communities, 100% affordable. Generally speaking, you don't have that. And then the other part of it is the tax credits, you can't do 400 units of tax credits at a time. It's 60 to 80 is about where you start to lose value in the tax credits. So the communities are not enormous. And so you don't have a large concentration of affordable housing in one community. Like, you can picture it in one corner of the community across the railroad tracks where you're not going to quote unquote bother anyone else. That doesn't happen. Great.
And there's a question about getting data on the benefits of supporting affordable housing projects to challenge the people who claim more crime declines in declining property value, et cetera. And Kylie just posted some great materials from the Partnership for Strong Communities. We also have a quick link on the front of our website called Connecticut Zoning. And if you go there, there are tons of resources, including wrapping back around to some of the partnerships materials, but lots of, there's videos, there's sort of a series of fact sheets. There's just lots of great information out there. So I definitely encourage folks to check that out. And maybe we have a few minutes left. So if anyone has additional questions, please pop that in. And in the meantime, David, I have one additional question for you, and also open it up to the other panelists. I mean, what is like the most critical one or two things that makes the Mount Laurel system work in New Jersey?
I come up with 5, Erin.
I mean, 1, 2, or 5 things. Yeah.
First, I have to realize what the accomplishment is. Tens of thousands of units of affordable housing have been built that, but for Mount Laurel, I believe would not have been built. And there's a huge increase in the variety and choice of housing available throughout the state. So, first reason, New Jersey law provides strong incentives for municipalities to recognize and accept their housing responsibilities, and then plan, zone, and create their fair share of affordable housing, or risk the loss of local land use control through builders' remedies. Second, the New Jersey system assigns specific numeric housing obligations to every municipality, so the municipality's responsibility is clear. Third, municipalities can use a wide variety of flexible compliance mechanisms to satisfy their fair share housing obligations. Fourth, the Mount Laurel Doctrine is based on the state constitution and implemented currently through state courts. This provides a vital enforcement mechanism and opportunities for negotiations to reach settlements among towns, advocates, and builders that results in affordable housing getting built. And finally, full disclosure, I've been the planning expert for Fair Share Housing Center for more than 2 decades. The persistent, tenacious defense of the Mount Laurel Doctrine by Fair Share Housing Center by Adam and his colleagues in litigation against the state and municipalities is a critical reason for this success.
And I think the challenge for Connecticut is can we create a structure, understanding that it has worked in New Jersey through a legislative process. I mean, that we have an opportunity to do that, and hopefully we can. There's a question here about basically, I'll say the question, but then I can add on to it. Does Fair Share include any provisions for infrastructure grants from the state to build, expand infrastructure? But maybe to add on to that, what other kinds of sort of add-ons to Fair Share help make it function well? And maybe I'll send that question to Adam.
You know, I think that sorry, could you repeat that?
Or yeah, so are there any grants or
I thought that's what you said. The one,
yeah,
okay,
and
sorry,
but then I was thinking, are there beyond that? I know there's some other things that are helpful, like pilot.
Okay, now I understand. Yeah, because I saw the question, then I was like, oh, that's beyond the question. So the Fair Share system has always been paralleled. I think it's critical that it's paralleled by a series of different funding resources, and at the local and state level, and also the way in which, and Joe referred to this somewhat already, the way in which federal resources are channeled through the state are also integrated with the system. And so there are basically, as I briefly mentioned in the presentation, every municipality has a local affordable housing trust fund. Practically every non-residential development in New Jersey pays a 2.5% fee of the value of the development towards affordable housing. Residential development that does not include affordable housing in most towns pays a 1 to 1.5% fee of the value of the development. And the great thing about that is that is all not federal funding that doesn't have all kinds of the limitations that federal funding comes with. And so it's incredibly flexible. I mean, it has to be used within reason, and we definitely have had examples of having to litigate against towns that have tried to use it for things that are not permitted. But many of the things that we're talking about, ranging from a lot of the funding past reporter was talking about, to it can be used on infrastructure, it can be used on helping residents get into affordable housing. In fact, is mandated to parts of it are mandated to do by state law in a range of ways, from down payment assistance to security deposit funds. And it also can be used for a range of different supporting the costs of pre-development costs that are needed to create affordable housing development. So those local funds are a significant source. There's also state funding called the New Jersey Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We also, the single largest appropriation from the state's American Rescue Plan was a $305 million appropriation towards supporting uncompleted 100% affordable housing development. So there's been a number of funding resources at the state level, and the state Affordable Housing Trust Fund is supported by a part of our state's realty transfer tax, which applies to sales of homes above, I believe the threshold is $175,000, and it's a percentage of the amount above that. And so we have these different resources that allow it. And I also think that an important point is that the way in which we allocate need is also integrated with things like transportation and jobs, the areas the state has designated for growth, areas of lots of jobs. So, our state has a transportation trust fund. That transportation trust fund invests disproportionately in areas that, are the growth areas of the state. And those are also the areas that have higher obligations. Rural areas with less infrastructure and fewer jobs have relatively lower obligations. So, you know, there's a number of ways. I mean, I don't want to, it certainly is not the case that the state pays for every penny of every aspect of infrastructure that could be attributed to affordable housing, but the state doesn't do that for market rate housing either, you know, and so, but there are a lot of systems that intersect with this in New Jersey to help make it feasible to create affordable housing.
All right, thank you. And I didn't get to Sonia's great question about the connections to inflation and the eviction crisis, but I think the short answer is yes, that having more housing units is going to be a tremendous help to Connecticut residents to offset those really difficult challenges. But thank you to all of our presenters today, our panelists. You guys were amazing, great information, and we were so grateful that you could come all the way up here to Connecticut and join us for this session.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for virtually having us. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our presenters, and thank you to the folks who stayed right up until 5 p.m. We'll look forward to seeing you back here at 9 a.m. for an introduction to fair rent commissions in Connecticut. So we'll see folks tomorrow morning. Have a great night.
Okay.